Welcome to the Lida Citroën Podcast, your space to grow your influence and elevate your personal brand. In each episode, you'll hear inspiring stories, expert insights, and practical strategies to help you stand out, lift up others, and leave your mark on your team, your community, or the world. If you're ready to make your voice heard, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Well, hello. Welcome back. It's the Lida Citroën Podcast, and I am so thrilled that you're here. Today, we have a special program because I am going to be joined by a dear friend of mine and work colleague, Param Venkat. And Param is a master storyteller who is going to take us through some of the really exciting, interesting, and maybe a little bit unknown aspects of storytelling at work. Without any further ado, let's listen to the conversation. You know, when I was thinking about what we were going to share today, I thought about my role as a public speaker because I have the opportunity to share messages with global audiences, to stand on stage and watch people learn something new or think about something differently than they might have before. And it is truly a monumental experience from my vantage point. And as much as I think I'm teaching, I learn sometimes more valuable lessons from my audience. And I remember many years ago, kind of when I was just starting out in public speaking, I had an opportunity to address a group of school bus drivers. So if you're not from the States, I don't know if you have this where you are, but we have buses that actually pick up children from their homes and their neighborhoods and take them to the school. And I had done work with this school district before, but for the first time, I was on stage teaching personal branding to school bus drivers, the people who actually man the buses. This was a totally different audience for me. But I approached it very similar to how I would approach any program. I had my PowerPoint, I walked through my methodology, and I noticed about a third of the way in that I'd lost them. I saw people doing this, sitting back in their chairs, almost with a scowl on their face. Some of them looked to the person next to them and started shaking their head. They got on their devices. They got on their phones or their computers. And I realized I had lost my audience. And it was a terrifying feeling because I still had 2/3 of the program to deliver. But in that moment, I decided to pivot. And I took a deep breath and I thought, okay, this isn't going the way it was supposed to. I'm teaching them something that's so valuable, but they're not taking it in. And so I pivoted to telling them what it feels like as a parent to put my children on a school bus. And I told them about my experience as a single mother when my children were little and the terrifying experience of putting them on a bus with somebody I didn't know to take them hopefully to school and keep them safe, to keep them protected. These children that are the most important thing in my world, I was trusting to someone else. And when those children were returned to me later that day, it was the most joyous feeling. And that went on day after day after day after day. And I shared with them my experience in their role. And what I did is I personalized the message for them. And slowly as I talked, I saw them start to sit up in their seat. And they started nodding their heads instead of shaking. And I then reminded them that if they don't take ownership of their reputation, if they don't stand confident in their role in the ecosystem of an education, then they're giving their power away. In telling that story, I built a relationship with my audience. I helped them understand that this message was not just about teaching a methodology. It was about an experience that meant a lot to me. And that is the power of storytelling. When you can personalize the message, when you can pivot if you need to, if something isn't going well, or when you can show your audience why the message is valuable to them, you've understood the power of storytelling. But that's why I'm so excited to have this conversation and bring up our guest today, because Param and I have known each other for a very long time. He is a storytelling and sales conversation coach based out of New Jersey here in the United States. And after spending 20 years in the tech sector, right, working in technology companies in sales leadership roles, in 2012, he started his own company, Spirea Inc., which is a sales and leadership talent firm that focuses on helping people build three critical skills: the ability to connect, the ability to communicate, and the need to collaborate. Over the past 11 years, he has trained and coached and consulted with hundreds of leaders all over the world in the art of storytelling, value selling, and collaboration.
Thanks, Lida. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so excited because I know one thing about you is you are a master storyteller, and half of our conversations start off on one topic, but then we end up someplace else because of all the stories that come forward.
Yep.
How did you get into storytelling?
Well, I had a moment like the story you just talked about from the school bus. 18 months after I started my coaching and training business, I thought it's a good time to go and get some feedback. So I sent out a feedback survey to my clients. I also did the old school of picking up the phone and calling few clients. And I asked this question: what do you remember from whatever I taught you from my programs? Very few people remembered the processes, the methodologies, the tools, the templates. But to my surprise, Lida, everyone remembered the stories I told them, the business stories, the personal stories. And that was the moment I decided that storytelling has to be part of the work I do. And I also reflected back on the 20 years of my career. I was fortunate to be in those executive rooms where you do the high stake presentations. And I saw people drowning in data with Excel sheets. And at the end, the meetings ended with no actions taken, no decisions made. They were not able to influence. So one of the things I want to sort of share today is that stories are the solution. They have the ability. It's a great tool to influence, inspire, engage, and make a great impact. So I'm very excited to talk more about it today with you.
Well, and I think what I heard you say is it's not that the methodology and the process and the teaching aren't valuable, but the stories are sort of the exclamation point. They're what make that message stick.
Yeah.
I know that I've heard you say that storytelling is both art and science. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's both art and science. Let me touch on the science part of it first.
Okay.
Three key things. One, stories are memorable. A lot of research has been done on it. In fact, Dr. Jennifer Aker at the Stanford University, she did an experiment where she asked 10 of her students to prepare a 1-minute pitch. They came back and presented. 9 of them had data and facts. One had a human story. And when she went back and asked the audience, people were able to remember that one presentation which had story, but they could hardly remember the 9 presentations which had data and facts. So she concluded that stories are about 22 times more memorable than data and facts. That's one. Second is stories are multisensory. So over the weekend on a Saturday, this Saturday I was in New York City. I was walking around Times Square, went into the Starbucks, picked up a coffee, started to walk with a coffee in one hand and some documents on the other. And Times Square is buzzing with activity as always. And all of a sudden, I felt a tap on my shoulder. And I stopped and I turned back. It was a complete stranger. He had seen me dropping some of the papers and he was kind enough to sort of call me out and hand over the papers. I thanked him and I kept walking. Now, this is what is happening as I'm telling you this. My brain is trying to remember, recollect, and retell all the events that happened. You and the audience here, even though you were not with me in New York when this happened, your brain is sort of able to visualize and imagine me going into the Starbucks or walking with a coffee or someone tapping on the shoulder. It's almost like our brains have started to dance together. And that's called coupling of the minds. It's also called neurocoupling in the world of neuroscience. That's why when you tell a story, the listener, almost all the senses of the listeners get activated. That's the power that stories have. The third one is the most important one. And that is, this is important for this audience because a lot of the audience here is presenting and influencing their audience. Stories create a pull. So back in 2017, we decided to get a puppy after a lot of pressure from our daughter, Julie, who is 6 years old now, and it's a different issue. She still jumps around like a puppy. Um, she came in early September. First 2 to 3 weeks were great. We were playing with her, and we were new to dogs. We were also learning with her. So every time we will give her a treat, she will listen to our commands. This was going on for 3 weeks. Then something happened. End of the 3 weeks, Julie fell sick. She was throwing up. And we decided to take her to the vet. The vet examined her and he said, it's okay, it's a stomach bug. You give her this pill twice a day for 5 days and she'll be fine. I said, okay. It looked like exactly like the treat we were giving her. So we came back home and I offered the treat to Julie. They are smart. She sniffed it and she figured out it's not a treat and she just walked away. So when we need a solution, our go-to place is YouTube. So I and my daughter went to YouTube and we saw the video of this guy opening his dog's mouth and trying to push the pill in. I said, let's do that. So my daughter, Sanjana, she opened Julie's mouth and I tried to push the pill in. I want to have the audience feel free to put on chat. What do you think Julie did? And Lida, I'm going to throw it back at you. What do you think Julie did? Did she eat?
I have dogs. I've always had dogs. I can only imagine what your hands looked like as you were trying to shove a pill down a puppy's mouth with those little sharp teeth. Yeah.
She just spit it out. And the point of the story is that's what your audience will do if you try to push your information about your company, about your capabilities, your products and services. Whenever you try to push something, you're going to get a pushback.
Right.
And that's what Julie did. Obviously, we had to give the pill to her. We figured out a solution. Again, please put on chat if you have pets, how to give pill to a puppy. What do you think I did, Lida, finally?
Did you wrap it in something or put it like peanut butter on it?
Exactly. We took a piece of cheese. We wrapped the pill in that piece of cheese and gave it to Julie. She not only had it, she said, give me more. And that's what you need to do. You need to wrap your data, facts, information. Those are important capabilities about your services and your company. But wrap it in a piece of cheese. Here, the cheese is the story. So story is that piece of cheese in which you need to wrap your information and give it to your clients. They will not only take it, they'll say, give me more. That is why stories create a pull. They are memorable and they are multisensory. That's why stories stick with your audience.
When was the last time your keynote speaker drove more action than just excitement? Today, it's not just enough to energize the audience. We need to show them how to use the skills we're teaching. If you're looking for a speaker who will drive your business goals, let's talk. Check out Lida360.com for more information. One of the things I've noticed with people who tell stories, and maybe I do this without realizing, is in our mind, we were there, we know everything that happened, and we might skip details or forget key pieces when we tell the story. And the other person isn't making that connection or the coupling as you talk about. What are some ways that we can work around that?
Yeah, one of the things is, see, you don't need to necessarily have all the details because stories trigger emotions, right? And so also storytelling is not a one-way street, okay? It's almost like you need to meet the audience somewhere in the middle. So once you tell your story, it's like I talk about me, I need to say, enough about me, Lida. What about you? Tell me about how did you grow up and tell me about your childhood in LA. Because story has to lead into a two-way conversation. Otherwise, it's just one way and it can be boring. So I would say that this is what works very well with respect to stories landing properly with your audience.
Well, and one thing you did in the two stories that you told us just now is you cited research, and it was interesting, right? I was making a note of that study. I want to look it up. But you also, then you made it a personal story. So for some people, telling a personal story may feel like too much. They may be uncomfortable or self-conscious about sharing their own experience. what are some ways that people can learn to become more comfortable telling a personal story?
That's a good point. So I will answer it in three parts. One, there is a myth that you cannot use personal stories in business setting, and I want to bust that myth right away and reassure the audience that please go ahead and use personal stories in business setting, because if you see leaders around you or celebrities, they all use personal stories.
Mm-hmm.
But the second, which is a follow-up to this, is that you can use personal stories and there's nothing called too personal as long as it makes a business point. So the story has to be in the context of your conversation. Otherwise, it won't make sense for your audience. I'll give an example. This is a storytelling, so I need to share some stories. This is something I heard from one of our partner storytellers in Hong Kong, Francis Mock. He used to work for the subway system, the mass rapid transit
Mm-hmm.
system, and they were going through losses. So the board of directors appointed a new CEO and told the CEO to cut costs, let go people. And he had to go to the first town hall and convey this message. He said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to figure out some other solution. So he went and told this person's story. He said that 25 years back when I got married, I and my wife were spending a lot of money. We were going to movies every day. We went to restaurants very frequently. We were buying things, and our bank accounts looked still good. Then we had our first baby. Our expenses went up. Then after 2 years, we had our second child, and the expenses skyrocketed. So one day I came back home. This is him narrating, and sort of told my wife, listen, we need to figure out a way to manage our expenses. We need to cut our expenses. And his wife responded to him saying, no, we are not cutting expenses. You're going to figure out how to make more money. And then he went on to tell his employees, that's what I want to do. I want to work with you to figure out how can we make more money, more revenues, because I don't want to cut cost. So if you look at it, he revealed a lot of personal things. It was quite personal about his conversation with the wife, but he was trying to make a business point, and they actually went on to start a consulting division and increase revenues. There's only one third thing I want the audience to be think about. Stories travel. A story told here could reach Kenya or wherever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do a little test. When you are telling a story, keep in mind that it may go beyond the person you are telling. So just ensure that will that story impact the reputation and brand leader that you talk about. If it passes that test, I think it's nothing called very personal about stories.
I love how you framed that, and I think no matter how extroverted we might think we are or how comfortable we are speaking, when it comes to sharing about us, it does sometimes make us feel vulnerable. I mean, I remember the moment when I took note of the fact that I didn't share personal stories when I was teaching, but the questions I would get asked by the audience were all about me. How did I relate to the message? How did I build my brand? What were some of the challenges I encountered when I started my company? And it seemed so odd. Like, why would they care about me? They care about what I'm teaching, right? Because this is valuable information. But to your point, they needed both. They needed me to wrap that pill in cheese
Exactly. Yeah.
because that was what was going to make it stick. And for those of you who might feel uncomfortable or be a little apprehensive about talking about your life, or, I do a lot of work with the military. There's a very fine line between how much they can share and how much they're comfortable sharing. It's sometimes baby steps, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like, try a couple stories which aren't deeply personal about trauma or anything like that. But
Exactly.
just to your point, wrap a business message in something that explains how you relate to it. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree. And also, if you're not very comfortable, as Lida said, try some stories first and get to sort of practice it. And you don't have to always share your own story. I could take permission from Lida about her school bus teaching the children story. As long as I give credit to Lida, here is what I heard from my colleague Lida. It's okay to use somebody else's story, right? That's one. And two, you can also use an example. You could use something visual. For example, I remember 2011, when I was in corporate, we had lost a big contract, and it was a big retail clothing company. We decided to go and meet the chief information officer to ask why we lost it. And he made this statement. He said, "You did not come across as one smooth piece of cloth. We could see the stitches." Now, that's just a visual to communicate that you did not come across as one team. So you could use those kind of visuals, metaphors. You could say, we all need to row the boat in one direction. That's how we are going to win. So stories are the best, but if you are not comfortable, use other stories, use metaphors, use examples, use visuals.
And what you're doing is you're painting the picture,
Painting the
right?
picture.
Like in your story, you're helping that person who's hearing you visualize somebody tapping you on the shoulder, which hats off to you. Because if somebody taps me on the shoulder in New York City, I'm not sure that I would be as open.
Yeah.
Especially Times Square. But, you know, to your point, we could feel that experience happening. You know, Donald Miller wrote a very famous book called Story Brand. And many of us have read it. Some of us have read it many times. And when he talks about how businesses have to tell a story, right? Why the product or service or company has a personality and how it relates to its customers. But one of the things he talked about in the book is that the hero of the story is not you and me. It's not the person telling the story. How would you expand on that in the context of the kind of storytelling that you're talking about for us as individuals?
No, that's a very important point he has made, that never make yourself the hero of the story, especially for our audience here. If you're in sales or recruiting or any function where you are sharing a success story to a new client, this is how you got to go about and say. A lot of the people do the mistake of narrating their success story by saying, our client was in a mess. We came in, we had a solution, we got the client out of the mess, and now they are doing great. Now, if I am your new client to whom you're pitching, I understand maybe that was the reality, but it seems like you were very successful. What about your client? I didn't at all hear about the success of your client. So the way to look at it is, if you are followers of Star Wars, you are not Luke Skywalker. You are not the hero. You are the Yoda. You are the guide. So always narrate the success story in a way that you came as a guide to help your client and talk about your client's success. Be the Yoda. That's the way I would sort of narrate any stories.
Be the Yoda. There's your tagline for Param. Be the Yoda. Well, and what you're really saying though is, yeah, and we tend to do this, especially when we think we're selling or we're promoting, and we do that on social media. I see a lot of people on their LinkedIn page, for instance. And I know we had some questions about how does storytelling play out on social media. They say, I'm great. I do this. This is how, you know, I'm a success. But the person looking at your profile wants to know, how are you going to help them solve their problems? How are you going to make the world better for them? So to use the word that you used, you show that you're guiding them, right? It's my methodology, my training, and my tools that help make this client successful. And this is what they did. This is their situation. This is what they did. And this is the result. You could use the STAR method, but always be thinking that the person listening or reading is trying to understand how you can help them, not how great you are, but how you can help them.
Exactly. And also, you know, even when you're introducing yourself or you're in a town hall, you don't need to start off saying, I'm so and so, I'm the CEO, I do this. Just share a story.
Mm-hmm.
Let people reveal who you are and what your character is and what you have done from that story. So you don't have to always introduce and talk about yourself. So don't make yourself the hero. Let them find out that you are the hero.
Or that you're the guide, right? Because
You're
they're
the
the
guy.
hero.
You're
Right.
the hero.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another thing you and I talk about a lot, and we both work in different cultures, right? Internationally, different audiences. How do stories play when you're dealing with different cultures? You mentioned that stories travel, but how can you ensure that your message is going to get translated culturally as well as in the language?
Yeah. So here is my take on it. Having done these programs globally, personal stories in my experience, the barrier is not that great. You can share personal stories because people are humans. If I'm going to share a story about my pet or family, there isn't much of a cultural barrier because people have families, people have pets. But the moment you start sharing a business story or something very specific to your country, your region, for example, I did a little mess up a few years back. I was doing a program for Asia. We had all the participants from Asia, and I played a video clip of Modern Family. And a day before, I had played the same clip for the participants in the US. They were laughing, they got the point, and it really made a big impact. When I played this, they were just staring and they didn't understand why am I playing this video and what's going on. So you have to be careful with respect to, obviously, culturally, what stories are you sharing. Even regionally, leader, if you go to, let's say, the coal mines in West Virginia and you start telling some Wall Street story, it's not going to sit well with them. So cultural is one aspect, regional, and who's your audience? It's like anything else. Know your audience before you share your story. That's still the basics of communication.
So can this work if, let's say, you're in a position where you have to speak to senior leadership in your company and you have to advocate for, let's say, increasing your budget? So a lot of numbers, a lot of data. And how do you wrap stories around that? Or if your boss is very data driven, right? They're very analytical. How would you approach something like that? What would your process look like?
Yeah, and we get into that a lot, and we have worked with a lot of people. I have done storytelling programs where we had CFOs, head of taxation, people who are like in numbers day in and day out.
Mhm.
End of the day, they are humans, and data is important. But research shows that data leads to conclusion. It is the emotions that lead to action and decision.
Mhm.
So even though your leaders might be loving data, it will only lead them to a conclusion, but that won't inspire them to take a decision. And I'll share one more sort of an anecdote. Another partner storyteller from Australia, Cam, his niece came home and she's an HR manager. And she was telling him that a lot of people are leaving our company. There is a huge attrition. And week after week in my meetings, I keep presenting this data to my CEO and CFO, but they don't care at all. They only care about revenues. I don't know what to do. So he suggested try the story method. So she went back into the next meeting. First, she presented the data and facts. Nothing happened. Then she took a bold step. She painted a future story. So that sometimes works better with people who love data. She said, we are 6 people here in this room. Imagine in 3 months, only 3 of us are here in this room. Other 3 have left. Imagine what will happen. And the CEO looked at her and said, what do you mean only 3 will be left? Why would you all leave? That's the question I've been trying to tell you, that why are the people leaving? He got it. So it's about packing the data and putting a picture of the future of how things could look like
Right.
if we don't do certain things. And believe me, Lida, we had a head of taxation, trying this out and coming back and telling us that I think I nailed it with the story.
Well, if I can win over a group of school bus drivers, I know you can work with the head of taxation.
Yeah.
And you know what I forgot to mention? That group of school bus drivers was my very first standing ovation.
Nice.
It was so cool. So yes, I have a heart for everyone. And the way that I actually phrase what you said, data drives connection or conclusion. The marketing axiom that I often use is we act on logic, right? I need a new car, but we buy on feelings and emotion.
Absolutely.
That one makes me feel sexy or attractive or successful. So we can't forget that logic and data get us to the conversation, right? That's the reason we're gathered here today, is to talk about the budget. But the emotion, being able to really connect with people, is where we get buying decisions, right? That's if somebody doesn't feel something, if you haven't moved them, then you're staying just on the logic side.
I had a friend of mine who was always very technical. When he's buying a car, he had a list of things that he needs in his car. And then he goes into the showroom. sees a beautiful red car, and he came out with the car, and it did not have the features that he wanted, not all features that he
Right.
wanted. So it was an emotional decision, and we all do that in our lives.
Of course we do. And I always say, if you don't think, you've made an emotional buying decision, look at the last thing you paid more for.
Yeah.
Meaning there was a generic option, whether it's a purse, a computer, whatever it is, there was a generic option, but you paid for the branded option. That's what brands do, is they make a connection. So Param, can anyone do this? Can anyone learn to become a storyteller?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think this is where the art part comes.
Okay.
Anyone can become a storyteller, but it's like any other art. You can't go to 2 violin lessons and become a violinist. So you can't, attend one session or a couple of programs. You have to practice, and that's what I and many of our partners, we teach how to do storytelling, give you a structure. Also, you need not be in sales. You could be in any role in your company, recruiting. You could be in HR. You could be in strategy, and you could learn storytelling, especially for people in strategy and communication. I've seen that people are very good in crafting an idea and crafting a strategy, sitting in the headquarters, but by the time it comes down, that message is lost. Right? That message is completely lost. It's like our old childhood telephone game that we used to play, that Sally says something to Jack, Jack to Tom, Tom to Julie. Now the Julie has to repeat what Sally said, and the message is gone. I call it the headquarters syndrome. Yeah, it's there. Something called headquarters syndrome exists, where people in headquarters create this strategy and idea, but they're not good at communicating it because it's very abstract. They're not packing those stories and giving those examples. So anyone can learn. You could be in any function, but it's an art like anything else, and you need to work on it. You need to practice it.
Well, and somebody asked a question about time constraints, and that reminds me, when I did my TED Talk, we were told we had 12 minutes. And in 12 minutes, I had to, as they say, unpack one idea. Now, 12 minutes is a long time if you're presenting your budget idea or advocating for a raise or something, or selling to a customer. 12 minutes can be a lot. But when you have to take an audience and bring them completely through a message in 12 minutes, you find how many things you can actually leave out. So there's a lot of stuff written about how to do TED Talks, and it is a great practice in storytelling, because we have to be concise. To your point, what's the business message, and how does the story wrap around that? Not just the story and how do I shove a message in there, right?
Exactly. And from a timing perspective, you could have a 2-minute story, you could have a slightly longer story, as long as you are hooking your audience and you feel that they are reacting to you. Otherwise, if you keep telling a story and don't make a business point, obviously, that's not a good way to go about. So ensure that you're making a business point. And stories could be as short as 30 seconds and as long as 3 to 4 minutes.
Question for you. As you're talking, I'm remembering a situation where I was in a group of men and women, and a woman was sharing a business reason, but she wrapped a story around it, and the story was really personal. She was talking about difficulty during childbirth, and the women in the room who had children could certainly click with it. The men in the room became uncomfortable. I'm sure there was a point to her story, and I'm sure she connected it to the business, but she lost and made the men uncomfortable in that room. What do you do if you're halfway through a story and you realize wrong story?
Yeah, that can happen. And that's why obviously you need to know your audience and pick the right stories. And I say you need to have a bank of stories and pick out the right stories like a magician and bring it out. If you're halfway through the stories, I think one is be natural. I think being authentic always helps. There's no sort of going back, but make that business point. And as long as you're able to make a business point and maybe involve them, you could trigger them to tell a story. I know I shared this. I know it's personal. I know maybe some of you got it and connected to it. I would like to know from any of you, men or women, did something like this happen to you? Trigger them to share back a story, and good chance now you're in a story conversation. It's not like a one-way street.
Got it. Because I think we've all been there where somebody shares too much information,
Yeah.
and it becomes very uncomfortable. So to your point, we really do need to know who we're talking to. We need to know how much do they know about this topic, right? When I did my TED Talk, I had to assume somebody didn't know anything about the military or somebody was a prior military service member themselves. So what are some ways that we can learn about our audience so that we make sure that the stories always fit?
Yeah, no, I always used to do this when I was in the corporate world. Some of my team members will come and talk about the meeting that we are going to. I'll always ask the question, who is going to be in the room?
Mhm.
What are they like? Anything that you can find about the audience is great. But obviously, if you're going to do a TED talk where you're going to have complete strangers, you may
Right.
not have the complete sense of the audience. But if it is a smaller group, I would strongly recommend you will always have someone who's more closer to you, connected to you. Make them your champion. Ensure that you do a little test with them. Ask them more about who's going to be there, what will sit with this audience, and do a little analysis. And today in LinkedIn also, we are able to do a lot of I think LinkedIn is a great tool to figure out more about what groups some people are following, or what are their thoughts, what do they believe in. And I think there's a lot of information out here which was not there many years back. So I think that's probably a good way to do a bit of analysis, and then be natural, connect with them. Stories help to connect and build trust. As the saying goes, stories are the shortest distance between two people. So if you want to reduce the distance between you and someone, share a story.
I love that. Stories are the shortest distance between two people. Love that. And you're right. So I think about somebody going for a job interview who should be looking up the recruiter's LinkedIn profile. Look at where they went to school. What sports were they active in? Where do they volunteer? Like you said, what groups are they following? This is where you're going to find areas of common interest, but you're also going to be thinking about the stories that that person might care about. And then as you study the company that you're interviewing with, you're thinking about culturally what the company cares about. And I heard you allude to this, but the thing we always have to be when we tell stories is authentic, right? We
Yeah.
can't claim someone else's story for our own. We shouldn't make up stories just because it sounds good. What are some ways we can hold ourselves accountable to stay authentic, do you think?
No, that's important. It's part of what I call it the story ethics. You have to be
Yeah.
authentic. You cannot make up stories, especially in the business world, because stories travel. So somewhere people will get to know about it. So I'll share an example. There was this president of a chamber of commerce, and he was inaugurating a 3-day event, and he started speaking. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here. I really appreciate that you have taken time to come away from your families to be with all of us for the 3-day event." And he went on to say, "As I was in the airport at Dallas trying to catch a flight, I saw this mother and daughter hugging each other and crying. Seemed like they were going to separate from each other for long. And that's really made me emotional. And I'm sure many of you are away from your families to come here." As he was saying this, half of the audience were nodding and feeling great, but there were some looking at each other because this story was actually viral on Facebook. He made it as if he was there and part of the story. And when you do that, your credibility comes down no time. He could have just said, "I don't know if any of you saw this story on Facebook." That's it. That one sentence he could have added and went on to tell a story. So always set the context, give credit to where the story came from. Don't make it your story, because then you're going to lose credibility.
Yeah, and like you said, stories travel.
Yeah.
Excellent.
One other thing I would like to say for a previous question you asked is that, especially we have a lot of technology folks, there is this concept of curse of knowledge. When you have a lot of knowledge in your subject matter, you become a subject matter expert. Your expertise becomes too much that you start explaining things in jargons, and your audience cannot understand what you're talking. So that's called curse of knowledge. There was this PhD student at Stanford in 1992, Elizabeth Newton. She did an experiment. She put people in pairs, She asked the first person to tap a song, and the second person has to listen and tell what song it is. So the tapper will tap a simple song like Happy Birthday, and the listener could not tell what song it is. Only 2% of the people could actually recognize the song. The reason is when the person is tapping, there's a tune playing in your head, the Happy Birthday. But that tune is not playing in listener's head. So when you are pitching your technical stuff, that is this tune of your expertise playing, but your listener doesn't understand. For them, it's like they're tapping the song, which they can't understand. So don't get into the curse of knowledge. Understand that there could be audience who don't understand your area of expertise, and get away from the jargons. Mark Twain has said, don't use a $5 word when you can just use a 50-cent word. And that's what my recommendation is. Simple business language helps a lot in stories to stick.
That might also explain why nobody can understand the song I'm singing when I'm trying to ask my husband, what is the name of that song? Because it makes perfect sense in my head. It is not coming through, and I'm not tapping. Over 1 million professionals around the world have taken my LinkedIn Learning courses, and they're seeing amazing results. Now it's your turn to join them. Visit my LinkedIn Learning page and see all the available options to create your personal brand, have honest career conversations, apply for a job inside your company, and grow your career. You can find the direct link in the show notes below. So the first action item that I heard you say is to create a sort of an inventory or a bank. And let's start with 5 stories. Yeah. Just start with 5 good stories, which you could modify to support different business ideas. Just start with 5, write them down, put them on index cards. That's what I used to do when I was building my speeches, is I would have these stories on index cards. Number 2, introduce stories into your daily work, and just start with 1 to 2. Start with 1 to 2 stories that you start working in. Maybe it's on your LinkedIn profile. Maybe it's in a meeting you have this afternoon or tomorrow. But start small so that you see how this starts to work. Number 3, think of your story in 3 parts. And we didn't really go over this, but a story, any message has 3 parts. It has an opening, a middle, and a close. The opening, as Param said, could be a story. It could be an aha or a shocking statistic or something of surprise. It could be an emotional hook, but we call the opening the hook. And you have to have a good hook, because if you start off dry, it's really hard to build back up. The middle of the story or the message is where you unpack the key points and you build supporting points and all of that. But the end of the story is just as important. I've seen wonderful speakers get to the end of their message and just go, well, that's all I had. So if anybody has any questions, and it's like, yuck. There's an analogy of, somebody on the balance beam in gymnastics. And when they come off the balance beam, they stick the landing, right? You want to stick the landing with a story. It doesn't have to be a ta-da, but make sure that you think through what the ending is going to look like. Is it a call to a request? Do you need somebody to do something? Do you want them to think about something? What is the end of the story going to look like? So think about your stories in 3 parts. Number 4 is start listening for stories. Param told some wonderful stories today. Start paying attention to how those stories are crafted, how they're organized, how they're delivered, how his voice shifted as he was telling something that was anticipatory. Somebody tapped on his shoulder. What was that about? And then the reveal, right? So start thinking about that. And then finally, the 5th one is remember that you're not the hero of your story. The other person has to put themselves in the position to see themselves as the hero. They will be more successful, happier, avoiding fear, avoiding pain, whatever it is. They're the hero of the story, not us. Wow. Did you love that program as much as I did? Here's what's really cool. There was so much that we didn't even get to. Param and I could talk for hours on the topic of storytelling and how important it is in business and why we need to think of different stories to share with our audiences to make sure we build connection, whether we're standing in front of a room of 5,000 people or whether we're talking to our team and sharing bad news. There's so much content, in fact, that next time on the Lida Citroën podcast, we're going to have part 2 of this conversation. Part 1 was what you heard today, and we're going to build on it next time to go into story archetypes and how different stories shape our memory and how we learn through story. We're going to talk about body language when you're telling a story. We're even going to hint at the idea of how AI is impacting our ability to tell stories. So join us next time on the Lida Citroën podcast for part 2 of my conversation with Param Venkat, where we will talk more about the importance of storytelling. Until next time, I wish you health, happiness, and all good things.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lida Citroën Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the show and leave a review. It helps more people discover these inspiring conversations. For more tools, insights, and resources, visit lida360.com or connect with Lida on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, your influence has the power to make a real difference.